Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Olson, and for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to present to you some of the points from Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, and from Thomas Jefferson's final draft of the Declaration of Independence. First, the premise follows. Both writers made the case that Americans were a new nationality, therefore they should be a new nation. Both writers used Christian values and virtue to emphasize the need for independence. Each writer came from a different background, bringing a unique perspective to the situation. Thomas Paine was born in Thetford, Thetford, Norfolk County, England, 29 January 1737, to Joseph and Frances Paine. His father owned a staymaker business, so when Thomas quit school at the age of 13, he worked as an apprentice for his dad making corsets. He ran away from home twice in 1753, but only his second adventure was successful, but short-lived, as he served as a sailor for 1 year. He found work in the 1757 at a London shop working for another staymaker. During this time, he attended public lectures on Newtonian science and philosophy. In 1759, he opened his own shop and married Mary Lambert. However, after a year, she died. In 1762, his business failed, and he entered the customs service as an exciseman in Lincolnshire. In 1765, the Customs Service dismissed him for trying to organize the workers. In 1771, he married Elizabeth Olive, and in 1772, he wrote a pamphlet entitled Case of the Officers of Excise, which received praise and attention in Parliament. In 1774, he befriended Ben Franklin, who was working in London on behalf of the colonies. He legally separated from his wife and transited to America, landing in Philadelphia 30 November 1774. With a letter of introduction from Ben Franklin, the Pennsylvania magazine hired him to be their editor. Using this platform, he published numerous articles. On 10 January 1776, he published Common Sense under the name of an Englishman, and Robert Bell was his publisher. They were surprised by the success of the pamphlet and published 25 more editions that year. The pamphlet was 8 inches by 5 inches and this is what it looked like in the Smithsonian Institute. Meanwhile, in July 1776, Thomas entered the Continental Army as a private and later became the aide-de-camp for General Nathaniel Greene, which was General Washington's most trusted general. In 1776, as the Continental Army withdrew from New York, moved across the New Jersey to Pennsylvania, David Hackett Fisher, in his book, Washington's Crossing, described Thomas. In addition to being an aide-de-camp, he wrote stories about how the war progressed as a war correspondent, and the troops loved him. He also started writing American Crisis during this time by candlelight at various stops along the way. Thomas Jefferson's background was quite different. He was born in 13 April 1743 at the Shadwell Plantation in Albemarle County, Virginia, to Peter and Jane Randolph Jefferson. His father was a planter and a surveyor. His mother was a wealthy, prominent Randolph family member, and her father was a planter and a ship's captain. He began his education studying under Presbyterian ministers who served as his tutors, who taught him Latin, French, Greek, and other things. At the age of 16, he enrolled at William and Mary College in 1760 and graduated in 1762. He studied law under the legal scholar George Wright, and then passed the Virginia bar in 1767. He became a lawyer and served as a delegate in the Virginia House of Burgesses from 1769 to 1774, where he advocated for policies to limit the power of the royal governor and organize boycotts of British goods. He served as a Virginia delegate to the Second Congressional Congress from 1775 to 1776, where he was chosen to be the principal writer of the Declaration of Independence. Both gentlemen again made the case that the Americans were a new nationality, therefore they should be a new nation. Paine presented several points in Common Sense. He was influenced by John Locke and expressed liberal ideas. His religious view was deism. And one point, a government of our own was our natural right. Besides, the English crown is more than 1,200 miles across the Atlantic Ocean and cannot possibly understand what the Americans really needed. The second point was the Almighty implanted in us these unextinguishable feelings for good and wise purposes. So the Americans had God and the law as their king and did not need the British king, who, by the way, was corrupt. A third point We can no longer live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the British court. We were driven to breaking all connections with her. The king, with his cruelty and tyranny, drove us away. Sin is reproached to any people, as it says in Proverbs 14:34. Jefferson presented several points in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was a Republican, but he was also a liberal thinker in some ways, due to his enlightened education. His religious views were a blend of deism and Unitarianism. One point, in accordance with the laws of nature, nature's God entitled the 13 United Colonies to separate from England. A second point was all men were created equal by their Creator. A third point, the current king, George I, historically injured the 13 colonies and repeatedly used absolute tyranny against them. Therefore, the king drove the Americans away from England. In closing, my task today was to point out some points from Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, and the Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Both writers made the case that the Americans were a new nationality, where therefore they should be a new nation. Both writers used Christian values and virtue to emphasize the need for independence. Remember, according to Paine, the law in America is king, and the law he meant was God's law. Pending your questions. Have a great rest of your day.